Hi everybody, this is Benjamin Boone in my messy little studio during COVID times. Thanks so much for stopping by the virtual booth. Very glad that you're here. I appreciate it so much. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a saxophonist and a composer, and for the past several years I've been working with an array of different musicians and poets to blend jazz and poetry in a new way. So I thought I'd chat a little bit about that here and share some of our work in this area during the conference. My first poetry and jazz album was with U.S. Poet Laureate and Pulitzer Prize winning poet Philip Levine. That album was The Poetry of Jazz, released in 2018. It featured Chris Potter on a poem about Sonny Rollins on the Williamsburg Bridge. Branford Marsalis was on a track about John Coltrane, a poem about John Coltrane. Tom Harrell on a poem about Clifford Brown, and Greg Osby, a special guest, on a poem about Charlie Parker. Philip Levine actually had, as a high school teacher, someone who knew and played with Charlie Parker. So that's a interesting poetry about jazz music. And in this project, it ended up doing really, really well, better than we ever expected. It was number 3 in the Reader's Poll, listed in several best of 2018 lists, ended up getting on NPR and the Paris Review, etc., etc. So it did really well. We released then in 2019 The Poetry of Jazz Volume 2, which did very well as well. And then the most recent collaboration is with a number of different poets, not with Philip Levine. And it came out just this past October. It features 11 very diverse poets. And we decided that this one should really be about what's going on in today, with social justice issues, with systemic racism. There are poems that address that, homelessness, poverty, drug addiction, police murder, all of those things. Came out on Origin Records, like the other albums came out on Origin Records, and it's been doing extremely well also. It features the track you'll see features Kenny Werner on the piano, Corcoran Holt on the bass, and Ari Honig on the drums. But there are 21 different musicians that you can see. Here's the back cover that end up playing a role on this album, including like Ben Monder, Peter Brindler, John Bishop, etc. Donald Brown plays some keyboard. His son actually did a rap on this as well. So I'm hoping that what you hear when you hear these albums is you hear a different way maybe of thinking about jazz and poetry and the interaction of those two. My hope is that the music doesn't serve just like a books on tape or just like a background for the poet, or it doesn't just react to the surface level of what the poet is saying. But what we really tried to do was to make it so the music enhances the experience of hearing the poem and adds emotional depth and adds meaning to the very important poetry that I think is represented on this album and the other albums. So I hope you think so too. Here are the poets. They include Juan Felipe Herrera, who was U.S. Poet Laureate, Ed Hirsch, who's a MacArthur Genius Award Fellow, Kimiko Han, who just won some awards. I can't remember offhand which ones they were. I think the American Book Award. Taimba Jess, Pulitzer Prize winner. Patricia Smith, Pulitzer finalist in AACP. Image Award winner, LA Times Book Award winner, and 4-time National Slam Poet champion. And T.R. Hummer, who's actually a saxophonist himself. Anyway, a great amalgam of poets and their very important message. Some critics have said like ripped from the headlines and things like that. So we're trying to address relevant issues. This is from the session we were doing. These are the same musicians that were on the track you hear with Taïm Bajess, but this is Patrick Sylvain from Brown University and Donald Brown, who produced this disc and the Philip Levine discs. One quick trivia thing that I'll share with you. Those of you that know microphones probably recognize this microphone. This actually is on loan from Ravi Coltrane. This is the John Coltrane RCA 77 that Systems 2 has. Mike Marciano has engineered these albums and mixed and mastered them, and so when I recorded, we did use that microphone. So this is Taïm Bajess's Against Silence, and I thought I'd share a little bit of the text of the poetry, so maybe while you're watching the video that I submitted, you can maybe take a screenshot and follow along. One of the things that critics have been saying about this poem and about the setting of the poem is that he ends up taking the name of people who've been murdered, by police. He ends up making a similarity between police becoming drones, being operated from afar and maybe without thinking. I love this line myself too. My name once held all possibilities, but now flies out from the mouth, hauling anger and sorrow. I have a right to be angry. I have a morgue inside my silence. I have an arm against my throat and a bullet in my head. I have a wedding to go to, a graduation to walk, a little brother to chill with, and now I'm a face on a placard in a sea of anger, a newspaper article. So all he wants to do is go home and be a person and have a life, right? But instead, he's a face on a placard, right? All of these things, a lesson in fear, and all I want to do is go home. Just a really, really, really powerful poem. And all of the musicians really felt like it was extremely powerful and tried to create music that did the work justice and made it so that the feeling behind the poem was even more digestible to a listener than maybe just reading it or just hearing a recitation. So I hope that you feel that way. Another video I think I submitted to to this, and if not, you can Google Benjamin Boone, The Poets Are Gathering, and several videos will show up on YouTube. This is Patricia Smith, and the opening track takes the perspective of a mother whose son has been murdered by police, and this is a perspective that we don't often see when we read the news headlines, right? It's usually the person who was murdered or the police perspective, but this is the mother's perspective. That's my son crumpled there, my son lying, my son positioned there, my daughter repositioned there, my daughter is exhibit A there, etc., etc., etc. Very, very, very powerful poem. I think one of the amazing things about Patricia Smith's delivery is that she does this consistently without giving a lot of space for the music, but that persistence gets at your soul, and she does it without ever screaming. It's a controlled anger, and I just think it's a very, very powerful recitation. So I hope that you feel like the music is too. That was recorded in Fresno with my group of Fresno collaborators, Ray and David and Patrick on the bass, and there's Patricia and there's me. So be delighted to talk to you more about poetry and music and the way that I think about it and what the collaboration has brought out. So I'd be delighted if you want to check out some videos. There's my website, benjaminboone.com, and there's my email address. I'd be delighted to speak with you. So thank you so much for dropping by, and hope we get to chat.